and you are a principal security consultant and a team leader. And you'll now share your experiences applying OWASP SAMM, including some pitfalls to avoid when implementing security activities in the development lifecycle. And you're going to tell us about the importance of security requirements and go back to the topic of security champions and how we can use them to kickstart our secure software development lifecycle. Is that right?
Exactly. Thanks for the nice introduction. Just one question. You're seeing my screen? You're seeing my slides?
Yes, we are.
Perfect. Then I'm ready to go. Welcome to my presentation today about using OWASP SAMM to kickstart the secure software development lifecycle. My name is Thomas. No, one second. Yes, still my name is Thomas. And I've been working in the field of information security for, well, at least 15 years by now. And I started out my career as a penetration tester. I did a lot of security source code reviews. And over time, and especially during the last years, I focused more on security requirements engineering, security architecture, and of course, secure software development. And what I want to do today is to share my experience with you. What works actually, what I've seen working at different clients, what's not working so good, typical pitfalls to avoid. And yeah, my focus area definitely will be security requirements engineering. I will go only briefly over the security champions because Lucian did a great talk already. So if you are listening to the recording of this video, check out Lucian's talk as well. Really good stuff in there. I really liked his approach doing the gamification aspect of the security champions. So yes, highly recommended. I will talk about a little bit how you can utilize the specific benefits of your development methodology. And I will also give you my take on Big Bang implementation versus steady improvements over time. And if I manage to stay in schedule, we'll also have a few minutes of Q&A at the end. Security requirements are the backbone of the secure software development lifecycle, and not all security activities are born equal. That's especially true for security requirements engineering. When you take a look at the different activities proposed by OWASP SAMM, you will see that many of them work standalone. Let's take, for example, something like dependency management. You have to make sure that the dependencies you're using, the frameworks, the libraries, and so on, are free from known vulnerabilities. You can use stuff like the OWASP dependency checker or some other tools to verify that you are okay, or patch and fix, or if that's not the case. It's a quick win. It works out of the box. Well, maybe not directly out of the box, but it's easy to achieve, and you don't have many other security activities to consider to make it work. When you're talking about security requirement, it's a totally different game. You have to actually consider all the requirements throughout all the phases of the development lifecycle. So don't get me wrong, if you're talking about security requirements engineering to create awareness, that's great. So if you're working on security requirements, especially in combination with threat analysis and threat modeling, it's an amazing tool to think about the actual attack landscape, think about which interfaces are exposed and what you have to do to ensure that your application will be implemented in a secure fashion. But if you're just writing down those security requirements and never refer back to them, that's just a small part of the whole activity. So if you manage to invest in proper security requirements in the beginning, basically building a foundation for all other activities, you can reap a lot of benefits later on. Oftentimes when I'm doing a project with my clients, they ask for specific security activities. How do we do them? What should we focus on? What are the specific areas that are really important with this activity? And my answer usually is, it depends, of course, but let's take a look at the actual security requirements, and we can derive a lot of input from them. We will see some examples of this in the next slide. Just one more quick tip. What I really like to do is using traceability matrices. A traceability matrix does basically map all the other activities back to your security requirements. let's say you have something during the last 24 hours, the topic of denial of service has been all over social media for certain reasons. And let's take this as an example. When we are talking about security requirements, you have to think about how do you prevent such kind of attacks? What are the thresholds you want to battle? You want to define, in cases of monitoring, when do you need to trigger alerting and so on. There's too much to cover in this presentation alone about this specific topic, but with your traceability matrix, you have an easy way to analyze where this specific requirement has been considered. For example, during requirements engineering, you have to make sure that when we're talking about security architecture, you have to make sure that you think about denial of service prevention on premise. You also have to consider doing it based on your provider. Maybe they have some service to do DDoS protection. Maybe you need to invest in a dedicated service from an online provider that protects you. You have to think about how to implement the logging and the alerting and so on. And if you're taking this example further and further, for all the activities, you can see where did you consider this specific requirement and where didn't you do this. And when you have to do root cause analysis, if something actually happens, you go offline because a denial of service attack, you have an easy tool to see instantly where you did address the issue and maybe where you failed to do so, and dig deeper considering the individual activities that have been taken based on this requirement. The worst case would be you don't have the requirement in the first place, so you have to start from scratch, and that's a great learning, but that's also part of this tool chain. But let's take a look at some specific examples. We have seen this and similar slides before today, so you recognize those 30 different activities, and I want to highlight specifically the activity of security requirements. Of course, the examples I'm giving are just that, a bunch of examples. You can derive many, many more. For example, security architecture, I already gave an example with the denial of service scenario before, but let's talk about secret management. Secret management is a really difficult topic because many applications have the need to access different kinds of secrets and credentials to access other services at runtime. So the application needs access to them. And of course, if an attacker is able to compromise the system, he might get the same permissions that the application has and has the same access to the secret. So how do you manage this? And there are different approaches to deal with this problem, from simple protecting it with operation system functionality. Maybe your virtualization software provides some functionality. Maybe you have a centralized service for credential management, or you decide you need to invest in something like HSM, a hardware security model. And of course, those different approaches have different costs and efforts assigned to them. And the most expensive and most secure solution must not always be the right one. In some cases it is, in others it doesn't. So how do you decide? Again, you go back to your security requirements, see what's appropriate for your application. And if you find out it's not clearly defined, go back to your security requirements engineer and define it together and make sure everyone is on the same page. Requirements-driven testing. Big shout out to the people behind OWASP SAMM for introducing this activity in version 2. I've been an advocate for requirements-driven testing for many, many years, and it really brings me joy to see it in the actual model written down. I've been working as a security consultant where I did penetration tests, code reviews, and so on for many years. And what I never really understood is when my clients actually refused to show me the security requirements. It's like going to the doctor and saying to the doctor, well, doc, I need a general checkup. Tell me am I healthy? Is something wrong with me? And the doctor does what the doctor does. He has a limited amount of time. He checks your main bodily functions. He checks if everything is okay with your eyesight. Maybe he checks your moles for changes and so on. So in this limited time, he uses his default approach, which is totally fine. But what you didn't tell the doctor is that you're planning to run a marathon next week in the heat of the summer. And if your doctor knew this beforehand, he would have run different checks on you. Because of course, it's still important that your eyesight is staying healthy. It's still important that your moles don't change. But if he would have known that you're planning to run a marathon next week, he definitely would have focused on other areas that are much more important to your actual scenario. And it's the same with penetration testing. If you don't tell me what's most dear to you, if you don't tell me where the crown jewels are and what you're most afraid of, I can't focus my attention on those aspects. And I will provide a general check and you will get a good result, but it's not as specific as it could be. So please, if you're responsible for assigning penetration testing and working with test teams, please pass on those security requirements. Security requirements go a long way, even into operation. I brought one additional example with me here. Let's talk about patch management. Patch management is also difficult because you have to decide, what do you do if a critical patch comes out? Do you install it right away? Do you run tests? How extensive must these tests be before you install it? Maybe you even want to wait for community feedback if this patch has any side effects you are not aware of. So what's the right approach? Again, I can't tell you because it depends. It depends on your actual security requirements. There might be the need for critical vulnerabilities that you patch right away, but certain applications have such high requirements concerning the availability that maybe is not the right approach. Again, you can either guess or you can talk about your security with your security requirements engineers, find out together so that everyone is on the same page and implement what's best for the application. And last but not least, there is also a great synergy with training and awareness, because on the one hand, defining and thinking about security requirements is an amazing tool to get security awareness for all the people involved. But it also shows maybe where there's a lack of awareness or where there's a lack of required skills. Let's stick with our DOS example. If you don't define denial of service resilience requirements, I assume many people, many developers will overlook this important issue and it will never come up. If you actually define that you need some kind of resilience, some developers may raise their hand and say, yes, I know I should implement something, but I'm not really well versed in this specific activity. I don't know how to implement this kind of resilience. And then we can sit together, we talk about it. Maybe the security champions come in and do some briefings, or for some especially complex topics, it might be a good idea to have some dedicated training. I'm thinking about stuff like authentication protocols, modern authentication protocols, OAuth and everything aligned with this is really, really difficult. And there is so many misconceptions and so much that can go wrong. Of course, it makes a lot of sense to do dedicated trainings concerning this specific implementation requirements. 2 quick tips I want to pass on along the way. I was quite hesitant to include the first one because it's also a pitfall that I want to make you aware of. But let's start with the good stuff. OWASP ASVS is a great standard. It's called the Application Security Verification Standard. And of course, many of you will now say, yes, verification, we do this in the verification phase. And you're totally right. In the perfect world, you use this standard in the verification phase, and I highly recommend doing this. But if you're just starting out, if you're looking for quick wins, you can implement your first security requirements, your technical security requirements. Of course, there's much more to it. But by basically flipping the ASVS recommendation on their head, and if it says verify that and so on, you can simply say ensure that and so on. This alone won't make you a good requirements engineer, but it is a great source of inspiration if you're new to the field and need something to get the ball rolling. Why is it also a pitfall? I don't have the time to go into it into detail, but it's the Dunning-Kruger effect in full motion, where when you first discover things like the OWASP top 10 or the CWE top 25, and you say, that's really good stuff. I learned a lot about security by reading them. I just put a link to them in my requirements documents and say, I want to be secure against these common types of vulnerabilities, and I'm done with it. Then this might be a good first step, but relying on this alone, that's not security requirements engineering. That's not specific enough. That's missing a lot of non-technical aspects. That's missing a lot of specifics of your application. So be aware that simply referring to some guideline and calling this your requirements might be a good first step, but that's, yeah, you're still at a very, very low maturity level and you have to go beyond this. Another important aspect is implementing quality gates to verify the security requirements early on. Why is this? With early on, I mean after introducing security requirements in your process, because there is an interesting phenomenon that many organizations treat their requirements like the Holy Grail. If you have a certain requirement and you don't implement it, you don't pass the quality gate and the application won't go live. Nobody wants this. Nobody wants to be blamed for this. But if you put this magic word in front of it, if you call them security requirements, all of a sudden, they become optional and they are treated as, yes, if there is the time we do them. They are often put in a separate document or in a separate system to handle them. And I understand it. If you're just saying, yes, my OWASP top 10 or my requirements derived from the ASWS, totally unspecific and quite generic, hardly testable often, do not get the recognition they deserve. That's I can understand. But if you really invest into security requirements and allow people to ignore them, you are creating a certain mindset. And that's really, really dangerous, because once this mindset is in place, it's hard to get rid of it. So if you're working with security requirements, make sure if you introduce them to really make them mandatory and install certain quality gates that will enforce them. Otherwise, you are creating a mindset or running the risk of creating a mindset that's highly detrimental. I've already used a lot of my time, so I will go over the security champions really, really briefly. As I said, Lucian did a great talk on them already. What I really want to stress is that security, what the biggest boost you can have is a security team and people who really enjoy doing security. You basically want to have a great security culture, and security champions are the ones who can significantly influence this security culture. So to enable them, to train them properly, to give them the space and the capabilities to do their job and enjoy their job is essential to get this security culture going. Use the benefits of your development methodology. When you're talking about personal development, one of the main recommendations you will get is focus on your strong areas. If there are weak areas, you should address them. But if you really want to shine, get those things into place, or that you're already good at, master them. This will make you stand out. And it's quite similar when it comes to secure software development. You really need to understand what are the strong suits of your current development model. And the great thing about OWASP SAMM is that it's technology and process agnostic, and you can implement it in different development approaches, but there is no one size fits all security activity. For example, if you're talking about DevOps, you are really strong in the field of automation. So utilize test automation as much as possible. On the other side, be aware of the weaknesses this approach has. For example, you have really small test windows where you can do manual testing, and you need to get creative to get this important part of verification done as well. There are certain approaches to do this. Introduce code reviews already during development, parallelize some activities, do some kind of continuous testing, overall the releases and so on. But you need to make sure that the main part comes from those areas where you're strong, the security automation, and patch up where you have your weak areas. It's also true the other way around when we're talking about more classical approaches, less agile approaches like waterfall, the V model, and so on. You have a lot of time early on in the design phase. You can really utilize this to get a great security architecture going, to do in-depth threat modeling based on your architecture, on your data flows, and so on. The application will hopefully be more stable from a design perspective. So an early investment there can pay off later on. So be aware of your strong areas and your weak areas and handle them. Yes, according to your individual methodology. Last but not least, the Big Bang versus gradual implementation question. What I've seen working in practice is that doing a gradual implementation, having an actual roadmap where you build a solid foundation, where you can reap some quick wins along the way, but basically building a foundation and aiming for mastery in the long run is the better approach. But I've seen several clients doing a Big Bang approach and have it actually work. This is especially great if you have smaller team size, if you're working in a highly agile environment, then you can implement many things at the same time fast and make it work. The risk is obviously higher. You have less time to experiment and see what's actually working for your process, but I have seen it work. So feel free to try it if you're in an agile environment and your development teams are small, but be aware that there are risks associated with this. Measure your progress and celebrate success is really important if you're going the slow route, because I've seen that it can feel after a while that you're not making progress anymore, that you're stalling with your activities. And that's, of course, problematic because that doesn't mean you don't make progress, you just don't see it really. It's important to take this step back, take a look at the big picture and see what milestones you have achieved during the last weeks, months, and maybe even years, depending on your schedule, and share those achievements with your stakeholders as well, so that everyone is on board and sees what you're achieving in regards to your security posture. Last slide, recommended reading. I'm really proud about this. I've been working on the concept for a new series of articles for the last few weeks. And finally, yesterday, I released the first article. So I would be really happy if you check it out and maybe give some feedback about it. The idea is talking about different deep dives into secure software development based on OWASP SAMM. And similar to what I have done today in those articles, I will take specific security activities and analyze them in detail, tell what works, tell you what doesn't work, analyze different pitfalls that are there. And yeah, the first installment is out there. It basically describes the overall concept. And every month I will release a new article going into one specific area, one at a time. The next one in July will be about, you might have guessed it, security requirement engineering, because it's a topic that's so dear to me. But in the future, I'm totally open to feedback, what you want to read. So please read the articles, give me feedback. You can follow me on Twitter to get all the updates. And yeah, would really love to get your feedback and your questions and your suggestions where to go next in this endeavor. So that's it from my side, from my slides. Do we have any questions for the Q&A?
Okay, we don't have any questions yet, but we've asked people to share their questions. We still have 100 participants on Zoom and some other people who may be joining us from YouTube live. So we'll give them a couple of minutes and remind everyone that you can ask questions or provide feedback through Slack. The program for today is available on the website as well.
So if we don't have any questions, sorry. So if you don't have any questions, I might take the 5 minutes to share one more story. I've talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect briefly before. For those of you who don't know the Dunning-Kruger effect, it's basically a phenomenon phenomenon that when you are new to a specific topic, you feel highly confident that you have it down. And it happened to me quite often, of course, because it's such common. But I remember really well when I was 10 years old, when I had my first Taekwondo session, I came back from the training and I was so confident that everyone who opposes me, of course, I would be able to knock down with my 10 years. I soon realized that's not the case when I did some more training sessions, but that's what we often see in security requirements engineering with those references to the OWASP top 10. When people first read up on those security guidances, the OWASP top 10 are amazing. They're such a great source of security knowledge. And when you first stumble upon them and read them and understand them, you get the feeling, now I understand security. If I take those recommendations and those are my security requirements, I'm really good to go. And one of my missions is to get people past this initial confidence and show them that there is much more to learn and to do in the field of information security, and what's required to take the next steps. And actually, to come back to the analogy with my Taekwondo training, which are the individual steps to go up belt by belt and get more professional and more skilled in those specific endeavors.
Oh, thank you. That was great use of your extra time. We still don't have any questions. And we have John Ellingsworth coming up in a couple of minutes. So we are going to thank you so much, Thomas, for your presentation. And
thanks for having me. And yes, looking forward to the next presentations as well. Thank you.
Sure. There is your Twitter handle over there for people to give you feedback and keep the conversation going. Thank you, Thomas.